everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Some experiences never fade, whether we've lived them ourselves or heard them whispered by those who swear they're true. A voice calling your name when no one is home, a shadow shifting in the corner of your eye, a glimpse of someone long gone, standing at the foot of your bed. But the stories we don't experience firsthand can be just as chilling. Passed down through generations, these accounts stretch far beyond our own lifetimes. Warnings from those who came before us, tales of spirits that refused to leave, and horrors that stalked the pioneers on their journey west. Tonight, we step into both worlds. Personal encounters with the unknown and the echoes of something much older. Some stories aren't just remembered, they refuse to be forgotten. So, let's get started, shall we? A few years ago, I lived in this massive old mansion that had been converted into apartments. Over 100 years old, creaky floors, drafty windows, the kind of place that definitely had character. My roommate and I shared the top floor, which had attic access with a private back entrance, a set of rickety stairs leading up to our kitchen door. The place had its quirks for sure, but we liked it. One night, I was curled up on the couch with my boyfriend watching a movie. It was late, but not too late. The house was otherwise quiet, just the occasional groan of old wood settling. My phone buzzed. It was my roommate. "Hey, bringing a date home. Cool if we use the big TV?" I told him sure, no problem, and my boyfriend and I moved into the bedroom to finish our movie. No big deal. A little while later, we heard heavy footsteps coming up the back stairs. Slow, deliberate, each one landing hard on the wooden steps. Then the kitchen door creaked open. The door that always squeaked, no matter how careful you were. It shut with a familiar thud. Footsteps moved across the kitchen, past my bedroom door, and down the hallway toward the living room. I didn't think much of it at first. My roommate had said he was coming home, right? We kept watching our movie, letting the sound fade into the background. Eventually, my boyfriend left, and I settled in for the night. And that's when something started nagging at me. A slow, creeping realization. The apartment was too quiet. No muffled conversation, no sounds from the living room, no movement at all. Something told me to call my roommate. "Hey, were you guys being super quiet or..." "What? We just got to Blockbuster. We're picking out a movie and then heading home." His response literally sent a chill down my spine. I didn't have anything to say at first, just sat there, staring at my bedroom door, feeling my stomach drop. Someone had walked through my apartment. Someone had come up those stairs, opened the door, and walked right past. Without thinking, I called my boyfriend. "I'm staying at your place." I didn't even pack a bag. I just grabbed my keys and left. To this day, I have no idea who or what was in that apartment with us. This happened today, and I need to get it out while it's fresh because I can't shake the feeling that something's wrong. I was home with my daughter, just a normal afternoon. She was in her room and I was folding laundry, not thinking about much. Then, out of nowhere, I heard my husband yell my name, angry, like I'd done something to piss him off. It stopped me cold. He wasn't supposed to be home yet, and he would never speak like that in front of our daughter. Before I could even move, my daughter came out of her room. She didn't say anything, just stood there, fidgeting, eyes darting between me and the direction of the voice, and I could tell that she was nervous, waiting for me to explain it. I grabbed my phone and called my husband. He picked up after a few rings. "Are you home?" I asked. "No," he said. "I'm still at work. Why?" I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, listening to how wrong the silence felt. The thing is, this isn't the first time. For months now, I've been hearing my husband's voice when he's not home. Sometimes it's distant, like he's talking in another room. Sometimes he calls my name, like he did today, but in a normal tone. The first few times, I brushed it off. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I was just used to the sound of his voice and my brain was filling in the silence. But this time was different. This time, my daughter heard it too. Now I don't really know what's worse. The fact that there's something in this house that's mimicking my husband's voice, or the fact that it's getting bolder, angrier. So my dad's a cop as well as my cousin, and they've both told me some pretty terrifying stories over the years. My dad also worked security at a haunted hotel before he became a cop, and we live on an Indian reservation where paranormal stuff seems to happen way more often than it should. I'll try to break these down into separate stories, but fair warning, some of this still freaks me out to this day. The woman at the Fairmont in Ottawa. Before he became a cop, my dad worked security at the Fairmont Chateau in Ottawa. If you don't know, the place is rumored to be haunted, and according to my dad, that rumor is 100% true. One night during his shift, he was doing rounds through a section of the hotel that was supposed to be empty. No guests, no staff, just dark hallways and locked rooms. It was around 3 a.m., of course it was, and he turned a corner. He saw a woman walking ahead of him. She was dressed in early 1900s attire, a long, flowing dress, walking at a steady pace away from him. At first, he assumed she was a lost guest. "Ma'am, this floor is off limits," he called out. No response. He picked up his pace, following after her, but just as he was about to reach her, she turned the corner. My dad immediately followed, but when he turned the corner, the hallway was empty. There was nowhere for her to have gone. No open doors, no stairwell, nothing. He searched the floor, checked every room, which were all still locked, and there was no sign of her. He swears that she vanished into thin air. The police station is definitely haunted. Now let's talk about the precinct my dad works at. According to him, 95% of the cops that work there believe it's haunted. The ones who don't, the rookies who haven't experienced it yet. The activity is pretty intense. Things move on their own. Cabinet doors swing open. Objects get shoved off desks. Chairs start spinning on their own. Doors slam shut with no one around. But the worst part, the shadow figure. Cops have seen a tall black mass with glowing red eyes standing at the end of hallways or at the bottom of stairwells. And it's not just the officers who see it. The criminals do too. They have security footage of people in the holding cells freaking out, staring at something just off camera, looking absolutely terrified. Some prisoners have refused to stay in their cells, claiming that something is in there with them. One guy told my dad, "This place is haunted, man." To which my dad just shrugged and said, "Yeah, it is." None of the cops like to be alone in the station anymore, because that's when the shadow figure likes to show itself. The demonic phone call. One of our close family friends had her own terrifying experience with whatever haunts the police station. She was at home when she got a call from a number she didn't recognize. When she looked at the screen, the number was 666 666 6666. She didn't answer, just sat there staring at it, waiting for it to stop ringing. 5 minutes later, she got another call, this time from a friend of hers who's a cop. Her friend was panicked. "We need to do something about this thing. Let's smudge the precinct." At that point, she understood. Whatever was haunting the station knew that they were about to try to get rid of it. It was fighting back. The next day, they went to the police station to perform a cleansing ritual. They smudged the entire building, but the entity did not go quietly. It got angry. Doors slammed. The air was thick, making it hard to breathe. When they reached the holding cells, the lights went out. The sage kept trying to go out. And then, the shell holding the sage cracked in half. That's a bad sign. They knew they had to leave fast. They buried the shell outside, but the haunting never stopped. Later, they realized that they'd made a mistake. They didn't clear the building properly. They'd moved sporadically, instead of sweeping the spirit out through the front door. Now, the entity was stronger than ever. The thing in the woods. My cousin, who's also a cop, once saw something massive outside of the school in our town. The school's in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense forest. One night while patrolling, he saw 2 huge figures walking near the tree line. He swears they weren't human, covered in fur, walking upright, and moved silently into the woods. He tried to report it, but the other cops just laughed it off. No one believes him, but I think that they're just pretending they don't. The highway cryptid. Another time, my dad responded to a call about a guy sitting on the side of the road. It was near the highway that runs through our town. Turns out the guy was a long-distance cyclist who had just pulled over to rest. But when my dad got there, the cyclist looked terrified. He told my dad that earlier, while biking along Route 117 in Quebec, he had stopped at the top of a hill, saw something crossing the highway. It was huge, covered in fur, but walking on 2 legs. The cyclist froze. He didn't want it to see him. He just crouched down and watched it disappear into the woods. He refused to keep going for a full 30 minutes. He told my dad, "I don't know what I saw, but I know it wasn't human." The thing that knocks. One woman in our town kept calling the police 3 nights in a row. She swore someone was knocking on every window of her house. It happened all at once, like a group of kids was playing a prank. But whenever the cops got there, nothing. No footprints, no one in sight. On the 3rd night, her neighbor came over, pale as a ghost. He asked, "Is this about the knocking?" The cop said, "Yeah. Did you see something?" The neighbor nodded. He'd stepped outside for a cigarette and saw a black figure standing at the woman's window, knocking. And then it ran, but not like a person. It circled the house 4 times, knocking on every window, too fast for any human. And then it stopped. It turned toward the neighbor, ran across the street, and hid behind a tree. For a moment, everything was silent, and then it peeked out from behind the tree, looking right at him. Its eyes glowed yellow, like a cat's. And then it smiled. So yeah, that's just some of the weird stuff that's happened around here. We live on an Indian reservation, and honestly, I feel like we see way more paranormal shit than normal places. And I don't think it's stopping anytime soon. This is the only real paranormal experience anyone in my family's ever had, but it gives me chills every time I think about it. Back in the late 70s, my mom was staying the night at a friend's house. It wasn't anything unusual, just a normal sleepover. They had hung out, probably listening to records, and then eventually went to bed. My mom was sleeping alone in the guest room, which had a little beauty desk with a mirror against the wall. It was sort of built into it. Sometime in the early morning, she woke up. She wasn't sure why at first, but then she saw movement out of the corner of her eye. There, sitting at the beauty desk, was a girl brushing her hair. Half asleep, my mom just assumed it was her friend. It was early. Maybe she'd woken up to get ready for the day. My mom mumbled something, probably a groggy, "What time is it?" or "You're up early." The girl didn't respond. She just kept brushing her hair. My mom wasn't alarmed. She was tired, and if her friend didn't feel like talking, whatever. She rolled over and went back to sleep. In the morning, she mentioned it casually. Her friend gave her a weird look. I never got up. I was sleeping all night till we got up. It unsettled my mom, but she didn't push it. Maybe she'd been dreaming, or maybe she just thought she'd woken up. She let it go until she heard the rest. Later, she found out that a girl had lived in that house before her friend's family had moved in, and that girl had died by taking her own life in that room at that beauty desk. It was the only paranormal experience my mom ever had, and to this day, she swears she was awake when she saw that girl brushing her hair. And honestly, I believe her. I'm diving right into the middle of this one. If you set aside your skepticism, this will be easier to digest, but it's only right that I start here. Yesterday, when I went into the office, I found a sticky note on the monitor of my computer. I recognized the unique pink square that had been left by Camilla, our secretary that works the front desk. I pass by her every day, and I can't help but notice her wide collection of sticky notes in all different shapes and colors. The message on the paper only contained 2 words in Sharpie. The note had to have just been written, as I could still smell the strong chemical residue on the paper from the marker that she'd used to write, "Sister called." I stood there staring at that note, trying to fight back tears and figure out what it meant because my sister died last year. I think it's safe to say that nobody at my work knows any aspect of my personal life past my name, maybe that I like cats. And that could be derived from simply looking at the minuscule amount of decorations in my cubicle. I'm quite reserved when it comes to sharing personal things about myself at work. I think it's inappropriate to expect a group of coworkers to empathize with what goes on outside the office doors. Camilla wouldn't have had any clue as to how unnerving the message that she left was. It brought me to tears after reading it. It was an unexpected response I couldn't catch, like bumping a glass off the table. By the time I could process the fall, the tears were too fast to catch. I went to the bathroom to clean myself up, and then I went to ask Camilla about the sticky note that she'd left me. I tried to believe that she must have spoken to someone and misheard them, but when I got to the front desk, the sticky note was still in my hand. I knew she'd written it, but I still asked, "Was this from you?" Unable to think of a better way to inquire without telling why such a simple message gave me such confusion, Camilla looked at the message and told me, "Oh yes, 10 minutes before you got back in, a woman called, Jamie, called asking for you. Said she was your sister." I was speechless, and I felt the tears begin to fall down again. Camilla obviously saw them and gave me a weird look. I told her that I just hadn't heard from my sister in a while, and I guess I didn't know how much I missed her. None of which is a lie. Before Jamie's passing, her and I had been fighting, and the last time we'd spoke was at Thanksgiving the year before. There was so much I wanted to say to her, so much that she probably wanted to say to me. But either way, that call, I think it was her goodbye. This happened when I was about 8 or 9. My mom was dating this guy at the time, kind of a jerk, but nothing out of the ordinary. One night he told me to go downstairs and grab him a glass of water. I didn't argue, I just got up and went. I got to the kitchen still half asleep, and that's when I saw something. A black figure, standing at the sink. Not moving, not reacting, just standing there. I froze. My brain couldn't quite process what I was seeing. Was it a shadow? Trick of the light? But no, there was something there. I could make out the shape of a person. Then, panic kicked in. I turned and bolted back upstairs. My heart was pounding. I burst into my mom's room and I tried to explain, but her boyfriend just rolled his eyes, told me I was imagining things. "Go back to bed," he said, like I hadn't just seen something or someone in our kitchen. I didn't sleep much that night. For years, I told myself that it had to have been a shadow, my tired eyes playing tricks on me, some weird childhood fear that got blown out of proportion. But now, looking back as an adult, I'm about 99% sure that it wasn't a shadow. Some dude was just standing in my kitchen in the middle of the night, casually using our sink. I don't know what's scarier, the idea that I saw something paranormal, or the fact that in the rough neighborhood we lived in, it was probably just some guy. There was a story passed down from my great-great-grandfather about his time on the Oregon Trail. Although the snakes and dysentery were common struggles amongst the pioneers, there was something far more terrifying than anything they could have imagined lurking in the plains of the Northeast. Creatures that would hunt the travelers and pick off family members, one by one throughout the night. Other wagon convoys would often pass by the destruction and carnage left in its wake. Most always because resources were scarce. The parties that did stumble upon the blood-covered land would loot the wagons and whatever clothing remained that they could find. As groups would inevitably cross paths and trade their goods, they'd also trade stories of a vile beast roaming the prairie. Skeptics would argue that it was the Native American tribes committing these acts against them, but some claimed that they'd seen the monster firsthand while traveling through the night. Whether the stories they told were nothing more than tall tales or based in reality, the tragedy that littered the trail was undeniable, and the families brave enough to pack up everything they had to go on this adventure were suddenly becoming more and more fearful of what was to come next. It was true that the pioneers had consistent run-ins with the Native American people. Most occasions were met passively. It was rare for them to engage with the wagon convoys. When skirmishes did happen, the natives were ruthless, and what they left in the brutal aftermath would be a mess of death in their own right. But it was a distinctively human mess. There would be discarded weapons, broken blades, and the wagon usually blackened by fire and missing its valuables. One of the most glaring differences being what condition the horses were left in. The natives either shot or stole whatever animal was at the front of the wagon. The beasts would consume them, either fully or partially, but always leaving the hooves and the horseshoes. Their bones would look crushed, as if bitten through with the strength far beyond the capabilities of a bear or a mountain lion. My great-great-grandmother, she was named Abigail, and she was just 5 when our family started their journey west. The immediate family she intended to travel with consisted of her mother, father, and her 2 older siblings, who both died on the day before they were set to leave. One of them was ran over by a horse, and the other was shot as they tried to defend their siblings' honor by stabbing the man who was riding the horse. The remaining 3 members would bury the 2 and depart before the sun came up the next morning. Abigail's dad, Amos, steered the wagon during the daytime, a male presence in the open to detour bandits. Then Livy, the mother, would stay up through the night and keep lookout. She could hold her own with a rifle, and during one of her nightly shifts on guard, she'd see something that she described starting out as a native woman. She rose up from the tall grass, seemingly appearing out of nowhere. Livy stood up from the small fire burning next to the wagon. She called out to the woman with a hello while waving the rifle in the air. The native woman stayed unmoving, all but her hair that was pushed around by the wind, and following its dance like the grass that grew past her hips, she was practically a silhouette against the night sky. And as the wind continued to blow her hair around, clumps of it began to fall away. She let out an agonizing, piercing scream that makes Livy lower her rifle. She moved her feet into a shooting stance. She watched in horror as the woman's screams transformed into a sickening gargle. Strands of what was originally thought to be the woman's hair began to move independent of the natural flow of wind. What Livy saw was explained to me as if it had come from the woman's throat, out her mouth, described like roots from a tree growing upside down. But the roots were alive and moving, stretching up to taste the cold air. What Livy saw before her no longer resembled a human, and it scared her enough to fire a shot from her rifle. The round hits the creature square in the chest, and it fell backwards into the tall grass, no longer gargling. The commotion had woken up Amos, and he was able to see the woman right before Livy pulled the trigger. Quickly grabbing a lantern from a hook inside the wagon, he ignited the oil and began panning the light over the tall blades of grass while standing on the wagon's front bench as Livy loaded another round into the rifle. She raised it again and put the wooden buttstock against her shoulder, and with the flint stock ready to fire while Amos continued to slowly move the lantern's glow across the land. While Abigail laid undisturbed, fast asleep, under an assortment of fabrics and animal hide, her parents were wide awake, just outside, prepared to meet any adversary that entered in their distance of illumination. From the back of the wagon, the family's 2 oxen started to make noise. Their bellies jingled aggressively, and the wooden bar that their ropes were looped to broke off the wagon, nearly tipping it over in the process. Amos and Livy watched as both of their oxen gallop in different directions into the darkness of the pasture. Without words, Livy takes off towards the back of the wagon. Amos, who's still on the wagon, turns and faces the lantern into the covered wagon. Before Livy's able to get all the way around, she hears Amos scream. 2 more long strides, and she's able to see why he's screaming. The native girl that Livy had previously shot was standing on the back of the wagon. She was facing the light that Amos was holding, shining at her. And that's when Livy was able to see the girl's features. The skin on the girl was discolored, hung loosely on her bones. Livy determined by her clothing that she was a native girl. Her eyes were open, but they were glazed in a fog. By all accounts, the girl looked deceased. Then, her jaw slowly opened, and her deep gurgling choke began again. Livy aimed the rifle, and as the first tentacle slid from the girl's lips, she fires. It takes off part of the girl's skull, but it doesn't fall or bleed. It was like her body was being used as a shell for something Livy and Amos couldn't see. It let out a hiss that sounds comparable to a fast-moving river. It's a burst of noise, and the creature turns its attention to Livy. Inside the wagon, Amos is terrified and does the dumbest, maybe smartest, quite possibly only thing he can do, which is to throw the oil lantern at the creature. The lantern explodes and fully engulfs the girl's body, sets the wagon top cover on fire. Livy runs to the wagon, desperately tries to untie the cover from the frame, as Amos fights through the fire to get Abigail. The creature jumps from the wagon and runs only a few yards before collapsing. The wagon was saved by Livy's quick actions, all except a cover, which they could purchase at the next junction. As the sun rose that morning, before continuing on, Amos located what was left of the girl's charcoaled remains, and it said that he did find the girl's body. It was completely blackened from the fire, unrecognizable of any features, besides being in the shape of a human. Amos noticed the head and the neck were missing, down to the curve of the body's shoulder blades. It revealed a hollow inside, the rib bones holding its skin like a tent, but no innards. It was believed that something was inside that poor dead native girl, controlling her, either as a shell or a lure. Then it crawled out when it could no longer use the corpse. Neither Amos or Livy spoke as they stood over that corpse. They never told the others in their convoy what happened either. But after that night, they noticed something strange. Stories of people disappearing, wagons left untouched, horses eaten. They stopped, as if whatever had been hunting them had moved on. Or maybe just moved somewhere else. The story's been passed down through generations in my family, always ending the same way. What Amos and Livy saw that night wasn't a person, and it wasn't just a creature. It was something else entirely. Some of my earliest memories are of visiting my grandparents' house. It was a cozy little place, faded floral wallpaper, the scent of old books and coffee. My grandmother was always in the kitchen, humming as she would be baking something sweet. And my grandfather wasn't much of a talker. He was a quiet man, always sitting in his favorite chair by the window. I remember the way that he'd sit there, watching the world outside, barely acknowledging anyone with more than a nod. He never played with me or spoke, but I never thought much of it. I was just a toddler, happy to be in the presence of family. When my grandmother passed away, I was about 3 or 4. After that, we stopped visiting the house and life moved on. I don't remember seeing my grandfather again after my grandmother was gone. Years later, when I was around 13, I was at home when something small but familiar caught my eye. My parents had moved my grandfather's old chair into our living room, the same one that he'd always had. I guess it was in storage. I smiled at the memory, running my fingers over the worn fabric. Casually, I said, "I remember Grandpa sitting in this chair all the time when we visited. He never talked, though. Why was he so quiet?" I expected a chuckle or a fond story, but instead, my parents went silent. They exchanged a glance, one of those looks that said 1,000 words without saying a thing. Finally, my mom cleared her throat. "Honey," she said slowly, "your grandfather died before you were born. I laughed at first, thinking she was joking, but their serious faces told me otherwise. I had memories of a man I'd never met, and he'd been sitting in that chair the whole time. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. Thanks for joining me. Whether it's your first time or you're a regular, your support means the world over here. We've got brand new stories every Friday night, and keep those eyes open for those deep sleep videos. And of course, subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll never miss a thing. Special thanks to the Darkest Hour channel members: Lori TESDAHL, Sarah Marie, Robert Bailey, T COLTDADDY Eagle, Mallory Dominguez, KARI Watkins, PILAR TREDEN WIXSON, Larry Hill, RIPLEY. And a big thanks to those who shared their stories, and a huge shout out to all of our patrons: Tracy S, Mary H, Tanya F, Tamara K, Monica L, ZoeWatt, Chelle B, Donald C, Marion T, Rat Girl, Alisha S, Erin G, Nikki H, Mr. Revenant, Naz K, Brendon G, Paul T, Nicholas C, Tony P, Lissane, Arlene F, Adrian, TF Parham, Jason G, and Lori T. If you want to support the Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining our Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour, or click the link in the description to learn more. Also, consider becoming a channel member. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, Amanda, darkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, the Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.